When Joe Biden is sworn in and becomes president in a few short days, he will have a lot on his plate. But one of the most pressing issues he'll need to address is safe and affordable housing. Housing in America was a nightmare for low income families before the pandemic, and now it's a full on emergency. Here to talk about the state of housing today and the steps President elect Biden should take to address it is Diane Yentel. Diane is the president and CEO of the National Low Income Housing Coalition, a membership organization dedicated solely to achieving socially just public policy that ensures people with the lowest incomes in the United States have affordable and decent homes. A right, I might add. Diane is a veteran affordable housing policy expert with over 2 decades of work on affordable housing and community development. Happy to have you here, Diane. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Hi. So talk about the state of housing for low income people in America right now. What are the most urgent issues renters and homeowners alike are facing?
Well, I think it's to best understand the housing and eviction crisis that we're facing down today. We have to recognize where we were before COVID-19 even came to our country. And that was in the midst of a severe affordable housing crisis where we had a shortage of 7 million homes affordable and available to the lowest income people. So another way of saying that same number is for every 10 of the lowest income renters, there were fewer than 4 apartments that were affordable and available to them. Because we had such a shortage of homes for the lowest income people, we had about 10 million of the lowest income renter households who were paying at least half of their income towards rent each month, and many were paying much more, 60, 70, 80% of their income just to have their home. And when you have such limited income to begin with, and you're paying so much of it for the roof over your head, you're always one financial shock away from missing rent, potentially facing eviction, and in worst cases, becoming homeless. So for many of these same renters, the coronavirus and its financial fallout is that financial shock. They've lost jobs, they've lost hours at work, and it's been harder than ever for them to cobble together what they need to make rent.
What are people doing? I mean, we're not seeing it covered in the mainstream media. Are people losing their homes, moving in with relatives, just building up back rent that they're going to owe? What are people doing?
I'd say all of the above. So, there were some protections and resources that were provided for renters early in the pandemic, resources provided through the CARES Act that was enacted by Congress, a patchwork of federal, state, and local eviction protections. Most of that was kept people housed through, say, late summer, expanded unemployment insurance, stimulus checks. All of that was what people were cobbling together to be able to continue paying rent. At that point, the vast majority of those resources expired, and the only remaining protection until late last year was the CDC federal eviction moratorium. So a few things were happening. One is that moratorium was flawed, and while it was generally speaking keeping many people housed who would otherwise be evicted, some people were falling through the holes in that protection and were being evicted. So there's been about 200,000 evictions just during the pandemic. Also, when resources started to dry up, people made toxic trade-offs in order to keep paying rent. Rent is usually the first bill that tenants pay because they know the consequences if they don't. So they were foregoing maybe store-bought food and having to go to food banks instead. That's why we've seen just this tremendous demand on food banks in recent months. They were paying rent on credit cards. And there's estimates that by the end of this month, tenants owe anywhere between $30 billion and $70 billion in back rent, which is clearly more than they can pay off in their lifetimes.
Could you talk for a brief moment about they must be cutting things like home heat? It's freezing cold in the Northeast and other parts of the country right now. Any insight you can give us to that?
Well, there too, we've also seen, just as back rent has been building up during the pandemic, utility payments have also been accruing. And that's part of that 30 to $70 billion in payments for rent or utilities that tenants are estimated to owe at this point.
What do we need from our federal government? And hopefully, it doesn't look like we're getting anything for the next, 8 days or however long it is.
Right.
But as Biden comes in, what do we need immediately? What can he do immediately to help these folks?
So, first off, where we are right now is that there was a COVID relief bill that passed and was enacted in late December. That includes an extension of the CDC federal eviction moratorium through the end of this month and $25 billion in emergency rental assistance. So, neither of that is enough. $25 billion isn't enough. Extending the eviction moratorium only through the end of this month isn't enough, but it's a really substantial relief to a lot of renters. So first, we have to work to get that $25 billion out as quickly as possible to the people who need it the most, the lowest income, the most marginalized renters who are most at risk of being evicted. And then we need more. So we're urging President-elect Biden on his first day, really first hour in office, to issue a new executive order with an extended, a strengthened, and an enforced federal eviction moratorium that lasts for the duration of the pandemic, keep renters housed during this pandemic. And then we're urging him to get back to work with Congress and pass another COVID relief package with additional funds to help keep renters stably housed during and after the pandemic.
Are we not feeling empowered enough to ask for a rent, not just a moratorium, but a rent strike?
Well, I mean, I don't think the federal government can have a rent strike. I think maybe what you're asking about is rent cancellation, and I think
that's
so.
What I mean. That's
yeah.
Well, the activists call it a strike, like strike rent, strike debt. But yeah, not.
I see what you mean. Yeah. So I think rental assistance, in our view, is more or less the same thing. We're getting money to pay that back rent that's due. And the $25 billion again.
Taxpayers are winding up paying that money. No,
who's that? What's that?
Not that I'm against paying taxes, but the money comes from the federal government, right? So basically, we're just funneling tax money.
I mean, it will one way or another. That rent has to get paid. There are small landlords who are predominantly the landlords who are housing the lowest income renters, many of whom are people of color, many of whom don't have access to credit to be able to borrow the money they need. They rely on rental income to be able to pay their bills and keep the lights on and continue to maintain and operate their properties. So that back rent has to be paid one way or another. And $25 billion is a down payment to meeting all of the debt that's owed. We need more.
I'm such a socialist. I'm like, can't we nationalize the banks and the utility companies? I mean, let's get real. I don't think those things are going to happen in Biden's first 100 days or whatever. But in a dream world, we could maybe do that and have even more power to relieve some of the suffering that's happening to the folks in these situations.
Maybe we could. I'm not sure that we could achieve that, but I do.
Not now.
I do.
But someday.
And I mean, to your point, we do have an incredible opportunity now with President-elect Biden coming in and with Democrats holding both the House and the Senate to achieve some of what President-elect Biden has already committed to, which is having housing be a human right and having universal housing assistance. That, I think, is achievable over the next few years, or at least we can make really significant inroads towards achieving that goal. And we certainly intend to push for that.
We are speaking with our guest today is Diane Yentel, the president and CEO of the National Low Income Housing Coalition, the membership organization dedicated solely to achieving socially just public policy that ensures people with the lowest incomes in the United States have affordable and decent homes. Diane, can we talk about what is happening to people who own their homes and who cannot pay their mortgages? Are you seeing a foreclosure crisis also?
We haven't, no. And that's been also because in the CARES Act and through various actions since then, there's been some relief given to homeowners, mostly in the form of forbearance, which essentially means that they can have a break from paying their mortgage now. And then those mortgage payments, the months that they didn't pay now, that'll get tacked on to the very end of their mortgage period. And that has seemed to be pretty effective until now.
What you tweeted in response to the insurrection in the Capitol, that white supremacist systems and culture in all their daily insidious forms should outrage and move us to action every day. Do you think white supremacy is at play when it comes to housing issues?
Well, there is a long and very well documented history in our country of racist housing and transportation policies.
That's how Trump made his fortune.
Yeah, well, right. And
Yeah,
that
Daddy
created the
Trump.
segregated communities that exist today. Everything from blockbusting and redlining to restrictive covenants, restrictive zoning, all of that, purposefully put homeownership out of reach for many Black Americans. And that's created this yawning wealth gap that we have today, where the average white household holds anywhere between 8 and 12 times as much wealth as the average Black household. And then this results in really tremendous disparities in housing and homelessness, where Black Americans are disproportionately renters, they're disproportionately low income, they're disproportionately rent burdened, they're disproportionately likely to be homeless. All of that is a result of decades of racist housing policy.
And what are we seeing today? I mean, I know you said that, but specifically secondary to the pandemic, I'm assuming that this crisis is just like the pandemic is affecting people of color, Black people at higher rates than whites.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when we talk, right, so all those disparities that I just talked about, that compounds the effect of COVID-19. So Black and Native American people are bearing the brunt of infections and deaths from COVID-19. Black and Latino workers are bearing the brunt of these historic job losses. And now it's their homes, and with it, their ability to stay safe and healthy that are most at risk. When we talk about an eviction tsunami that's on the horizon and tens of millions of renters who could lose their homes if the federal government doesn't act, the vast majority of those renters are people of color.
What can people do who are watching to secure, if they're in a compromised position, what can they do to secure their own housing, their own right to housing without incurring rent on a credit card, which is usury? I can't believe that's happening.
Yeah, it is happening. It's really troubling. Well, the first thing renters should know is that there is a federal eviction moratorium in effect, and it's in effect at least until the end of this month. But it's not automatic, and so in order to receive that protection, tenants have to sign a declarative statement that they're eligible for it and give that form to their landlord. So tenants who are at risk of being evicted for non-payment of rent should take that step right away, and then look for resources that might be available in their community to help them pay the rent. So there were some resources that were provided in the CARES Act back in March. Many communities have created emergency rental assistance programs. We've been tracking them on our website. There's about 550 emergency rental assistance programs that we're tracking. At this point, about 40 or 45% of them have closed because the resources have been depleted, but some are still open, and many more will start to open in the coming weeks as this $25 billion starts to go out to local communities. So check our website, check the websites of your governor or your mayor, reach out, call 211 and find out what resources might be available locally to help you pay the rent.
Diane Yentel, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. You can follow Diane on Twitter at Diane Yentel, Yentel. Final words, final thoughts about how our activists, we have a very action-oriented activist viewership, how our activists can help folks who are suffering in this crisis.
I mean, I would say that the biggest opportunity we have right now is to build off of this new, it's not a new problem, but I do think there is a new understanding of how housing is healthcare and just how harmful evictions are always. And so we have this opportunity now to build off of that understanding, to hold our policymakers accountable to real solutions. So I would just say continue to call your members of Congress, weigh in, urge them to invest in real solutions to end homelessness and end to housing poverty, because we've always been able to. It's always been a matter of a lack of political will, and maybe now we actually have the political will to achieve it.
Thank you so much, Diane. I really appreciate you joining us on the program today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
You're watching Act TV. I'm Julianna Forlano. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, subscribe to our YouTube page here, and keep coming back. Tomorrow, Marianne Williamson is going to be on our YouTube page. That'll be fun. Follow us across platforms, act.tv. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and all over the place. And you can find me, Julianna Forlano, on Twitter at Julianna Forlano, where I occasionally tweet out interesting things, powerful messages, and pictures of my cat. Have a great day, everybody.